Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Peah. We're up to Parak Mishna Aleph. We're going to continue discussing different laws regarding leket. Now Rabotai, the Mishnah is going to discuss the law of leket that becomes mixed in with other grain. Now, meaning, let's say you have stalks of leket that fell during the harvest and it's scattered over the field, over part of a field. Before the poor person had a chance to come and collect that leket, the farmer piled his grain on that section of the field. Now, meaning that the farmer's grain is covering the leket, and we don't know what stock is leket and which stock is not. The halacha is like this: Gadish shelo lukat tachtav. If there is a pile of grain that has underneath it leket that was not collected by poor person yet, kol hanogeh ba'aretz l'yushanim, the halacha is that all the stocks that touch the ground belong to the poor. Meaning, they're all considered leket. The Chachamim came and said anything that's touching the ground has to be given over to the poor person. Now, even though you're going to tell me that 1 second, there's only at max 3, 4, 5 stocks of leket from this field, how am I giving him 15 stocks that are all touching the ground? The Mefarshim explained that the Chachamim penalized the farmers. Since the farmer covered the leket with his grain, hiding the stocks from the poor, the sages came and said that anything that touches the ground now belongs to the poor, you must give it to them. The entire bottom layer of the pile. Now the Mefarshim say, the Rav explains, even if you're able to differentiate between the leket and the rest of the owner's produce. For example, the leket that was scattered on the floor was barley, and the farmer came and threw his wheat over the barley. Chachamim say anything that touches the bottom, anything that touches the ground, even if it's wheat, you have to give over as leket to the poor person as part of the penalty. And the halacha also is that we know that actual leket is exempt from Trumot HaMasrot. The poor person takes it and he eats it without having to separate anything. All the produce that is on the ground, touching the ground, even the part that's not really leket, for example, the part of the produce that the farmers threw on the ground covering it, we said that it belongs to the poor, even that is exempt from Tumot HaMasrot, because the Chachamim have a power called Hefker Betin Hefker. They're able to make people's property ownerless, so they make this produce that is touching the ground ownerless, whatever is not leket, thereby making it exempt from Tumot HaMasrot, because we know that produce that is ownerless is exempt from Tumot HaMasrot. Now, Rabotai, what happens if it gets scattered because of an onus? Let's say stocks of leket were lying on a field, and the wind came and scattered bundles of grain over the field, causing the grain of the bundles to become mixed in with the leket. And the Mefarshim explain, you have piles of grain that are loosely tied. The wind came, untied it, blew that grain over the leket, and now you have a whole mixture, and you don't know what's leket and what's not. So the halacha is, we estimate how much leket this field is expected to yield, and the farmer gives that amount to the poor. And the Mefarshim explained, because different amounts of leket fall in different fields depending on the crop, depending on the season. For example, if it's a very well-watered field, the grain is going to be more plump, and therefore it's going to fall less when you're harvesting it, as opposed to a field that's very dry, and the produce is more scrawny or more thinner. That'll fall more often. Therefore, the Tanna Kama says we look at every single particular field, we estimate how much would have fell, and that's how much the farmer gives to the poor. In that case also, whatever the farmer gives that's not actually leket is also going to be exempt from Tumot HaMasrot, because since it's a safek leket, we said anything that's safek leket we consider as leket, and it will be exempt from Tumot HaMasrot. Now, what's the difference between this case and the first case? That we said in the first case, whatever is touching the ground you have to give, and in this case we only say we estimate how much should belong to the ani and we give that to him. Then Mefarshim explained, because here there's no penalty. Here the owner didn't come and try to hide the leket by throwing his grain over it. The wind came and blew it. Therefore, Chachamim don't penalize him, and we only give to the poor person what we assume is his, what he deserves. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, we don't estimate off each and every individual field. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, we look at the average field, how much leket falls, and we give that to the poor person. You don't have to calculate based off a particular field. And the Mefarshim we're talking about an average field. It's not very well watered. It's not particularly dry. There's a certain amount that we average out for every field, and we give that over to the poor person. And the Rab explains, in such a field, 4 kabin of leket fall in an area large enough to plant a kur of seeds. That you look in the Mefarshim for the actual math. But Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says we look at the average amount and we give that over to the ani. That is the end, Rabotai, of Mishnah Aleph. Mishnah Bet now is going to move on discussing for the first part of the Mishnah the mitzvah of shicha. Now, Rabotai, we know the mitzvah of shicha refers to bundles of grain that was forgotten in the field, or a stock of grain that was overlooked and left unharvested. Meaning, a person harvested his field, took some grain and stocks of grain, and he went over to the threshing floor and he realized, I forgot a bundle back in my field. Halakha, he's not allowed to go back and get it. He has to leave it for the poor and for the convert. Same thing, if a person harvested his field and he left some stocks uncut, that's also, he forgot. He harvested field, he forgot that he had some grain still standing, and he left the threshing floor. He realizes, oh, I have still some grain there, I didn't realize it out. Since he forgot, he has to leave it there for the poor and for the convert. Remember, the word shicha comes from the lashon of shachach, he forgot. The mitzvah is when he forgets, he has to leave it there. The Mishnah discusses a very interesting case. Let's say I harvested part of my field, I forgot one stock standing, but that stock is close to the second part of the field I didn't harvest yet. Again, we have an entire field split into two, let's say. The first half of the field I harvested, but I forgot to harvest one stock, and that one stock is close to the second half of the field that I didn't harvest yet. Mishnah says, Shibolet Shiva Katsir. If a stock of grain was overlooked and left standing in the harvested section of the field, but it's close enough to the section of the field that was not harvested yet, V'rosha Magia Lakama, if its tip, when it's bent, it will reach an area of the standing uncut grain, meaning, Rabotai, the Mishnah says halakha would be like this: Im nikseret im hakama reish shel baal habayit. If that stock which you forgot to cut, its stem is reaching into the unharvested section, plus it's close enough that you're able to grasp it with one hand and cut it with the sickle in the other hand, it belongs to the baal habayit because it's not considered shicha, it's not considered forgotten. Because in our case, what is shicha? The Torah says, don't turn back and go and get the produce that you forgot. In this case, the Rav says the owner didn't forget. The owner doesn't have to go. The owner forgot, but he doesn't have to go back to get that stock because he can proceed in the usual manner when he cuts the next field. He can also cut this forgotten stock because he can reach it, and it's considered part of it. Therefore, it's not considered forgotten. Whereas the Mishnah says, V'im la v'rishananim, if it cannot be cut together with the standing grain, so it's considered you have to go back for it when you forgot it, and the halakha is it belongs to the poor person. So it's always going to be considered shichad, the standing grain that you forgot to harvest, unless you have two conditions. Number one, its tip is bent over to the second half of the field, the unharvested part, its tip can reach there. Number two, it can be harvested together with one hand with the standing grain. You can grab that one stalk that you didn't touch and the next part of the field and harvest it in one shot. The Mishnah now goes back to the topic of leket. Very interesting, Abotai. Shibolet leket she'it'arva begadish. We're talking about a case where you have a single stalk of leket that was not collected by a poor person yet, and it became mixed into a pile of non-leket, of the regular produce by the farmer. Let me read it to you well, first let's read in the Mishnah, and then we'll read the commentaries. The Mishnah says, Shibolet she'leket she'it'arva begadish. If this single stock of leket that was not collected by the poor got mixed into a pile of regular produce, the farmer separates maaser from one stock from the pile and gives that stock to the poor person. In exchange, the poor person gives the leket, meaning the rest of the regular produce, to the farmer to keep. That way they solve each other's problems. But let's read in the Mefarshim to understand clearly what is going on here. The Mefarshim say like this: Shibolet leket shibda begadish hayta petura mina maaser. The piece of leket that got lost in my produce is exempt from maaser. You don't have to give tithes on it. Vilu hashibolet sheronten ata lani timurata yitachen shi mishar gadish chayav b'maaser. Now this one stock that I give over, let's say right now we know that the leket is exempt from maaser, so it got mixed in with my pile. If I go over to my pile right now, pull out one stock and say, here, poor person, this is yours, there's a problem by doing that because maybe this piece that I pulled out is obligated in maaser. It's obligated because it's not a leket piece, it's a regular piece. Maybe you pulled out a regular piece which is obligated in maaser. If I'm going to give this piece over to the poor person, he's going to have to separate maaser, and he's not really gaining his full leket. So in order for me to make sure that this poor person gains his full amount of what he deserves, I have to make sure that the piece I give him now has turumot and maasrot already separated from it. In that way, the ani will get the full amount that he deserves. He won't have to separate turumot and maasrot. It's impossible to say that I'm going to take off myself from this one piece that I give him. I say, here, Ani, come here. I'm going to give you a stock, break it in half, and give him the rest. Say, this is myself, the rest is yours. That you can't do. Why? Shimken yotze ani nifsad. Ani's going to lose out. Because I'm not going to give him the full 100% stock like he would have had from his lekit. I'm giving him 90% because I'm taking 10% out or 2% out, whatever the tumot masrot are. Ella, rather, kavanat the Mishnah is talking about shemotzi od shibor min hagadish. The farmer takes out 2 stocks from the pile. Vekovea ba et tumot masrot shel shiboret harishona. And what he does is he says like this: if I have 2 stocks in my hands, if this stock is lekit, perfect. It belongs to you, poor person. You don't have to take off masrot. You're good to go. But if this stock is not lekit and I have to separate tumot masrot, I want it to come out from this piece. The 10% will be covered by this piece. This piece is fully yours, no tumot masrot needed. Shabbat shalom. But the Mishnah says, the Mefarshim explain, still it's not going to be good enough to fix the first stock that I give the poor person. We have a concern, maybe this second piece that I took is really leket. What happens? We go to the poor person, we say like this: poor person, I have 2 stocks in my hands. If this one is leket, perfect, it's yours. If it's not leket, I'm giving you a regular piece that already has tumot masrot because I'm going to exempt it by giving it from here. The Mefarshim explained there's a problem because maybe this one's really leket, and if this one's leket, you cannot separate masrot from something that is already exempt. What are you going to say? If this is leket, take it. If it's not, I'm going to separate masrot from here by removing it from here. The problem is, what if this is really leket? And if this is leket, you cannot remove masrot from something that is really exempt. You cannot take off ma'asrot from this second piece. I'm sorry. Because we're concerned maybe that second piece is really leket, which is exempt, and you're not allowed to separate ma'asel from something that is exempt. What do? You have to take out a third one. You have to take out a third stock. What do you say? I have 3 now. I say, if this second one that I took out, that I want to exempt myself from this one by taking it from this one, if it's really the leket, and I can't take masrot off of it because it's exempt, so I want to take off masrot from this one, from the third one. Very interesting. So I have 3 pieces here. I say, Ani, if this first piece is leket, it's yours. If it's not, then I'm taking off masrot from the second one. And if the second one is really leket, and I can't take off masrot from it, so I want to take off masrot from the third one. So now, the first masel that the first stock that I'm giving the poor person, either way you look at it, it's going to be kosher. Why? Because if it's actually leket, like I said, poor person take it, you're good to go. You don't have to give masel. And if it's not leket, so now I took leket off from 2 other pieces, so you're for sure good. Either this is leket, it's yours, and if it's not, only one of these can be leket. So I for sure took masrot of 2 other pieces, which one of them for sure has to be able to be taken off. Because we know only one leket got mixed up in the pile. So if you only have, if I would make it easier, let's make it easier just so we can visualize it. You have 3 apples, and one apple that fell in belongs to the poor. Only 1 apple, and you have 3. So I say, Ani, if this apple belongs to you, take it. And if it doesn't, and this apple is really yours, then I want masrot to come up the third one for you. It's very interesting. Let me just explain it one more time. You have 3 stocks. I go to the poor person. I say, poor person, if this piece is leket, I want you to have it. Meaning, take it. No masrot needed. You're good to go. Now, the problem is, what if it's regular, and I have to take off masrot from it to give it to you? I want masrot to come up the second one. And now, you're good to go. You have a perfect piece. Now, what about if this second one is really leket? This is a regular piece, and this is leket. I cannot take masrot of this piece, because it's exempt from masrot. So I took out a third one, which I know for sure cannot be leket, because there's only 1 leket in this pile. Either this one's leket, or either this one's leket, meaning the third one's not. So I want masrot to come up the third one, and for sure this one is clean, because either it's leket, and if it's not, for sure one of these isn't, and I took masrot of that one. This piece that I took out and I gave to the poor person is perfect. It exempts the problem that I have to give to the poor person. The second two other pieces might have an issue. You have to look in the Mefoshim for that. Now, Rabotai, we solved the problem by giving it to the poor person. The only problem we have left is how is the farmer going to have the rest of it if there's possibly a leket inside. For that, the Mefoshim explain that the poor person is going to give the leket as a gift to the owner, thereby permitting the rest of the crop. So everyone goes home with what they have. The poor person goes home with his portion, and the farmer goes home with his portion. Amar Rabbi Eliezer says, right, so the ani takes this stock that I gave him. He says that I acquired this now, and the other ones I give the rest to you. Amar Rabbi Eliezer says, וכי האח העני הזה מחליף דבר שלא בא ברשותו, אלא מזכה את העני בכל הגדיש ומעשר שיבולת אחת ונותן לו. רבי אליעזר says he has a problem. כל זמן שלא זכה העני בשיבולת הלקט שהתערבה בגדיש, אין לו זכות להחליפה באחרות, ואם החליף לא עשה כלום. Rabbi Eliezer says he has a problem. How can the poor person give over as a gift something that he didn't get yet? Meaning, we're saying like this: the poor person, I gave him the stock, correct? The problem is that there is a piece of leket that possibly is in the rest of the owner's portion. So what did we say? The poor person says, I'm giving it to you as a gift. The problem is, Rabbi Eliezer says, how can you give something as a gift which you didn't get yet? If the poor person didn't receive the leket in his possession yet, how can he give it over as a gift? And even if he gives it over as a gift, he says it shouldn't work because it belongs to he didn't get it yet. He has to first get it. Therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says, do something interesting. The poor person has to acquire first the entire pile. So now certainly he's going to have the leket in his possession because he acquired the whole pile, including the leket. And now he says you give it all back to the owner. And the owner now will give him one piece of leket to solve the problem. So Rabbi Eliezer says you have an entire different method of working it out. Rabbi Eliezer says, what do? You don't have to do this whole take three stocks out, maaser off one, and for sure it's good. Rather, the farmer grants ownership of the entire pile to the poor person. Now the poor person has ownership of the leket along with the rest of the field. The farmer separates maaser from a single stock, gives it to the poor person like we explained this whole order. In exchange, the poor person grants the farmer the stock of leket along with the rest of the pile. So now we have the entire pile belongs to the farmer again, and the pauper received a stock of grain in exchange for the stock of the leket, if this one possibly isn't leket. Whereas the Tanakama holds, you don't need all this, even if the ani didn't acquire the leket yet. The fact that Chachamim say Chachamim gave him the ability to switch it with a different one, because this is one of the cases where Chachamim made an exception in this rule. Meaning Chachamim say, even though the poor person didn't acquire the leket yet, he can still transfer the ownership over to the farmer. And the end of the day, Rabotai, in conclusion, we have that the farmer has to give one stock and make sure there's no masrot to the poor person. The poor person grants the possible leket stock in the pile as a gift, so the farmer can have the rest of his pile. Chachamim say you don't have to acquire the whole pile first. You can just make the transaction with the three stocks. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer says you got to first acquire the entire pile first in order to avoid the problem that the poor person didn't acquire it yet, and then you'll give it back as a gift, etc. That solves that problem. That is the end of today's Mishna Yomi, Rabotai. Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen v'amen.